Good morning, good evening, whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing. We wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The Silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you tuning in today, we welcome you in. I've been reading a lot about the oil sands and what they're planning to do with them, and it's quite frankly alarming. Oh, what's he doing on screen? My ratings go up when he's on screen, so he takes front and center stage for the next little while. But the oil sands, well, maybe I need to give you a primer on what the oil sands are. The oil sands are basically crude oil that is trapped in sand, hence the name oil sands. And it's a pretty big industry in Alberta. Alberta is a province of Canada, and they've been known for their oil for quite some time. The problem is, whenever they refine this oil, they go through a lot of water. And that water winds up in holding ponds because, quite frankly, it's nothing you would care to drink. Quite the opposite. They've been detecting increased cancer rates, increased mercury rates, and all sorts of horrible things in the wildlife. And whether we eat the wildlife or not, that's not good for the environment. But there's a new strain of argument that's coming up and saying, oh, well, releasing the tailings, the bad water carefully, is a lot better than a sudden flood. On this, I would agree on a technicality. It is better than a sudden flood, but the same token, this is basically salt water that's coming out with chemicals in it. And any controlled release has a significant effect on the population. So, let's look back just 14 years to 2016. That's not 14 years. Let's look back at the opposite side of the country to Nova Scotia, where they had an iron plant. And it used to use Coke. Now, we're not talking about the bottled soft drink, and we're not talking about the thing that you get at parties where you're told to shut up about it and just sniff. We're talking about processed coal. And it took them, well, from 1899 until 2012 to clean this thing up properly, and it's still horrible. They've got it as a park today, which means they've buried a lot of it in the soil. But realistically, it's never going to be cleaned properly. They've just humped a bunch of dust and dirt and crap over it to make it somebody else's problem. Halifax Harbor, they just included a $500 billion cleanup of it. You still can't drink the water, and you still can't swim in it. But hey, yay, we cleaned it up. The fish are still dead, everything's still dead, but we cleaned it up. So let's look back at our friends in Alberta. One of the interesting things about it that I'm surprised nobody is paying attention to is the salinity, the salt. When you dump the water, that is salt water that you are dumping into fresh water. Well, if you've ever had a freshwater fish and dumped salt water into it, I pray you haven't except by extreme accident, you know the fish is going to die. Just like a saltwater fish coming into a freshwater environment is going to die, except for a few extreme cases. And that's what people aren't seeing. The people who are getting screwed over the most by this are, surprise, the First Nations, who have launched extensive complaints that this is an invasion of their land, it kills fisheries, surprise with the salt water and the mercury, huh? And they're raising a pretty big stink. But compared to that, some people are saying, oh, it's all Canadians' decision since we all benefit from the oil. No, I don't think so. We have a serious problem with the oil sands. And I don't even know if it's possible to cure it. It's the processing that's the problem. The oil itself, yes, we do need it. But at what cost? And this is always a problem right now. Buddy, come on, chill out. People are here to see you. But at what cost? And the second you start getting involved in drinking water, that is really, really not acceptable. I mean, look at Flint, Michigan. They still haven't completely cleared up their crisis of a couple of years ago. All around the world, people are desperately trying to get clean water, and Alberta is home to the First Nations, where they're crying out for fresh water. They're saying, can we please have fresh water? And the federal government's saying, maybe, we're busy building a pipeline through. Can we do that later? And here's something that is completely preventable, something that does not even need to become an issue. And it's becoming an issue because people just want to let a little bit loose at a time. Well, that's how things start. We know that from the past century, when people just dump a little bit of their garbage into the ocean, and it won't be that bad. And from the looks of it, the environmental regulations for this is appalling. Now, the oil companies do have a good point. They keep building more and more of these water tar pits, basically, where they dump the tailing water into, and that's not acceptable either. You see, there's this arcane technology called distillery. That's right. The same stuff that gives you whiskey, the same stuff that gives you gin, the same stuff that's been around since the Arabs invented it, is probably less expensive and less energy intensive than anything they're going to do to clean it up. And nobody is proposing that. And this just drives my brain wild. We're talking about people's lives. We're talking about animals' lives. We're talking about everybody's lives, because we all need fresh water. There's very few people who do not need water. What we need to come to grips with is we are in a very terrible situation at present when it comes to fresh water. Canada holds the lion's share of the world's fresh water, and yet we are so willing to pollute it. The drop of a hat. These tar sands companies have been around for decades now. This isn't even their peak season, because a lot of the crude that comes from there is the heavy crude. So it's good for asphalt, it's good for, roof shingles, but it's not really so good for driving your car. And this is something people have to remember. We're not lowering the price of gas by pushing this legislation through. We are by a tiny bit, but overall, you probably get more petrol in Petrolia, Ontario than you did to do from the Athabasca tar sands. And we haven't really done an environmental impact study worth a darn. It's pathetic how little management has gone into the environmental management of this process. Is it negligence? I don't know if I want to say that word, but if they start dumping it out, it's definitely negligence. Even the release of a little bit of that water, like I said, contains salt, contains mercury. So you're basically, I don't know how many of you are old enough, but remember long ago down in Hamilton, there was that pool of absolute crap. And it glowed a little bit at night. I have no idea what was in it. This is back when Hamilton was known as Steel City. And yeah, that took them decades to clean up. And it was not a big pond. And you're talking about the entire Athabasca River basin that you're proposing dumping this crap into. And I keep calling it crap because the real world word that's in my head is a lot worse. So the Athabasca River basin, which is huge and gives a lot of people their water, not only First Nations, but cities and everything, is now going to have this mercury and salt in it that has to be cleared somewhere down the line. Whether it's at a municipal source where people are going to be taking their drinking water from it, or wherever the stuff drains to, be it ponds, streams, etc. Those are all going to need to be cleaned up. Again, the Nova Scotia coke fields, they're still working on it. Halifax Harbor, they're still working on it. And here we have a chance to put in some really, really workable solutions before the problem even begins. And nobody is doing it. We're all saying, oh, we need to compromise, we need to do this. No, we can't compromise. I am no bleeding heart environmentalist. I'm not. But at the same token, I don't see the point in making a problem when it doesn't need to be made. You solve the problem now. You take an extra year or two because those things are not going to be overflowing anytime soon. They're pointing to British Columbia and the floods they have out there. Yeah, British Columbia is essentially a rainforest, so you get a lot of flash floods and stuff. Alberta gets them too, but not as frequently. And if their management has been so poor that they won't be able to control the outflow of these things in the event of flash flooding, then we have a serious engineering problem. So I ask you, from a purely scientific standpoint, let's not worry about the humans and the people who are being deprived of their water. Let's just say, hey, what about the environmental damage? And we do need fish. People do like to go fishing. And people actually do catch trout and stuff off the rivers. And it's a pretty good living if you can get it. And we're just willing to throw that all away because we have a whole bunch of salt contaminated water that we figure just dumping a little bit at a time will be okay. No, because I guarantee within a year, 2 years, 5 years, someone's going to say, oh, well, this didn't have any demonstrable effects. Let's release more. Or worse, like what happened in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, where one day the government wasn't there anymore, and nobody knew who was paying the bills. Yeah, you go upside down like that. And it is a possibility. I hope it isn't. But at the same token, it's a possibility. So we have a responsibility now to clean this stuff up. But people want to shove things down the road, say it's not my problem, and let somebody else deal with it. And that's the fundamental selfishness that politics involves. So I'll leave you with that. Keep a watch on it. If you feel like it, write a note to your MPP or MP and just say, hey, let's give people fresh water, because we don't want to get into that situation of water everywhere and not a drop to drink. Otherwise, you look as dead as Ace does here. Anyways, we wish to thank you for listening to the Silver Light Show. If you enjoyed it, please hit like, share, and subscribe. We hope you have a fantastic day.